Okay, so what do you all think of church? And when I say church, I mean not the belief in God, not the belief in Jesus, not the actual tenets of Christianity, but the gathering of a bunch of people in a building with a band and singing and a message and the offering and just the fellowship of all these people together. What do you guys think of that? My entire life, I loved church because I've been a Christian. And when I say a Christian, I mean an actual relationship with God, I talk to Him personally. I was seeking God. I was seeking Jesus from as young as I can remember. I've always loved church. I've always loved Bible study. I've always loved seeking after God. Now, granted, it wasn't until I was 33 that I finally found him, if you will. When I say that, I mean I finally was able to the light went on, the light bulb went on, and I understood how to have a real personal relationship with God. I'd been seeking it my whole life, but it wasn't until I was 33 that I finally got it. And no, I can't put it into words. I really can't. It's just, I finally, I guess you would call it coming face to face with him, and finally got to know him and know that he loves me personally. I can talk to him anytime I want, about anything, and he cares. He cares as if I am the only human being on the earth, and he does for you too. That being said, I always loved church. And when I was 33, I started going to a church up the road from me, which happened to be a Pentecostal, non-denominational church. And I actually met my husband there. He was the head usher and a deacon. And my son and I was going through a divorce. My son and I needed a new church to go to. And a friend of mine who's an evangelist, I asked her, where can I go in this area? Because we just moved there. And she told me of this particular church. So we went. And for the first couple of years we were there, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. They had classes. When I say classes, I mean between services and stuff. They would have little groups where you could learn about just about anything. I mean, it was really cool. It's like in-depth, single subject Bible studies that would last for a couple of weeks or whatever. And I took all of them, well, almost all of them. And I met my husband's niece, his oldest niece, who isn't that much younger than me. And that's kind of how I met my husband, because even though he was a head usher there and a deacon, and I saw him all the time, and we, we spoke in terms of church. He had his eye on me already, it turns out. I didn't know that. And, but because I found out that he was her uncle, I started talking to him, and he, like I said, he already had his eye on me. And then I realized what a wonderful man he is, and fell in love, and we were married for 5 days shy of 27 years. Well, the wedding was 5 days shy of 24 years. We dated for 2.5 years before we got married. did not live together, did not have sex. We did it the right way. He had 2 kids, same age as my son. One was 2 years older, one was 2 months older. And we spent the 2.5 years allowing the kids to get to know us, each other, us to get to know them. The whole idea was for us to have a blended family and work our way into it slowly. So almost every date we had, we took the kids with us. And the church was great. It was a huge church, had about 3,000 people, give or take. It was wonderful. It really was wonderful. You could feel the presence of the Holy Spirit. You could feel, I don't know, it was great. And then something happened. Something weird happened in the church leadership. The head pastor and his wife were starting to go through a divorce. And it was just a very strange time. And the pastor decided to step down temporarily to, I don't know, go through what he had to go through. And when he did, all of a sudden there was a power struggle. And several months later, he decided he wanted to come back. Well, it was very clear to pretty much everybody he wasn't ready to come back. But the people who had, the other pastors, and they were pastor heavy, that had kind of filled the void, they weren't happy about that because they liked the taste of the power. So there was a massive, massive problem and struggle that took place. And they had a meeting of all the pastors, elders, and deacons one night. Not on a Sunday, but during the week. And my husband being one of the deacons, and we were married at the time, by that point. Him being one of the deacons, he was in the meeting. Well, I came with him. I wasn't in the meeting, but I was in the lobby, and they were in, just hanging out with the kids that were there, that came with their parents. And they were just a couple of doors over, in a room a couple of doors over from the lobby. And you could hear them. The door was shut and you could hear them. They were screaming at each other. They were using foul language with each other. They were, whatever. My husband was so upset by that. And he said, he actually spoke up. My husband never spoke up. He hated confrontation. He passed away 6 months ago, but he hated it so much. He wouldn't stand up to people who were just crapping all over him because he hated confrontation that much. He changed over the years. He finally started standing up for himself, much to the consternation of the people that were crapping on him. But he actually said something which is out of character for him at that moment. And he goes, please, we can't do this. This is a church, we're all here for the same reason, to worship God. And they shut him up. They told him to be quiet, to sit down and be quiet. And they just kept on with their arguing and their fighting. And that just, boy, that affected him. It affected me. I could hear it. And the church immediately changed. There was a huge split. And most of the pastors left, and their positions were filled with people who weren't trained. Most of the people in leadership there weren't trained. They were just people who, for whatever reason, just happened to be in the right place at the right time, knew the right people, had enough money. All the elders had money. Every last one of the elders had a lot of money. And that's how you became an elder. You were rich, period. And it was just, anyway. So the church split, and it was a distinct change. The pastors that were running the high school, the junior high and high school, we liked them. We thought they were pretty good, and they had a decent influence on the kids, we thought. The guy who took over, who is now the head pastor, was probably the biggest liar and immature jerk I've ever known. I was working in the high school because all three of our boys were in high school, and I was working in the high school as a volunteer to be close to the kids. And they had this event called Acquire the Fire, where the kids went to the Florida State Fairgrounds, and they had a couple of day concert. We all stayed in a hotel there, and it was a couple of day concert where they had all these bands and presenters and lessons and stuff. Well, prior to this, my husband's oldest son, 17-year-old son, had knocked up his 15-year-old girlfriend. A girl who was trying to get pregnant. A girl who wanted to trap herself a husband. And he was just a naive idiot who thought with his dick. And he did think with his dick. Boy, oh boy, did he think with his dick. He had a girl he was dating prior to that from the church who wasn't going to put up with that nonsense, and she broke up with him toot sweet. So he hooked up with this little whore. And they got knocked up. Well, she happens to be the stepniece of the guy who was in charge of the high school, who is now the head pastor. And at the Acquire the Fire, I was sitting 2 rows behind. I had instructed them to keep their distance because they were setting a very bad example for the rest of the kids. They all knew she was pregnant, and they were setting a very bad example by sitting together and nuzzling, and she kept playing with his face and everything while the thing was going on. I was 2 rows behind him, and I was absolutely livid. So I went over there in the middle of it, and I said, "Stop it now," because I was one of the adults there. And I said, "You two can't be alone together, period." And her parents, who were elders, and the high school leader's brother is her stepfather. They came at one point and whisked Junior away with the whore and took them to lunch without asking my permission, because I was his stepmother at the time, and I also was one of the volunteers, but most importantly, I was his stepmother. We had already had a long talk with her parents about how we wanted our son to handle things, handle his responsibilities, but go to college for a couple of years. She could finish high school because she had 2 years to go, and then they could get married, but he could handle his responsibilities for the baby in the meantime. Well, they weren't going to have any of that. They had already decided when they came to our house, he was going to come live with them. They were going to give him a car, blah, 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 blah. And we're like, excuse us, but that's our son. They didn't care. They did what they wanted to do. And then they smeared our reputation at church, completely smeared our reputation at church. And so people would tell us, how dare we, there's a baby on the way. And that's what this guy, this high school guy said. He actually said, because I went to him and I said, this is inappropriate. They're behaving so badly in front of all the other kids, and they're sending a very, very bad message. We've got to stop this. And he goes, "But there's a baby on the way." And I said, "So what? there's a baby on the way because they were screwing in our house every day when we were at work. That's not something to be rewarded. And we got into it. We got really into it. And then when we got, I'd had enough, and I walked out. I called my husband and I said, come pick me up. I'm not doing this anymore. And then we met them at the church when the bus came back, and I got my luggage and picked the kids up. And the next day was Sunday, and I got into it with him. I mean, I was telling him, I said, your behavior was inappropriate. Plus, he did something that was absolutely appalling. The night before in the hotel, it was like 11:30 at night, midnight, something like that. We heard this huge commotion. There were 4 lady volunteers in one room, and the guy volunteers were in another room, and the kids each, had rooms, like 4 in a room. And we heard this huge commotion, and we went out to find out what was going on. And one of the boys' rooms the door was open, and Glenn, the high school pastor, was wrestling with these kids as loud as can be at midnight, waking up the whole hotel. And the manager came because other people were complaining. And as soon as the manager got there, and I saw it, I was there. I watched him wrestling with the kids. And I said, guys, you've got to be quiet. There were several of us that said that. And I was there witnessing this when the hotel manager came. And as soon as the hotel manager got there and got to the room, Glenn stood up and he goes, now, guys, I told you, you need to be quiet. He was the one making most of the noise. And he apologized, all sappy sweet to the manager. Goes, I'm sorry, this will never happen again. And the manager left. He was pissed. The manager left, and immediately Glenn and the kids all started laughing. I was absolutely disgusted. So when I got into it with him on that Sunday, I said, what kind of an example are you? You actually lied. Oh. I said, you actually lied to that manager in front of all of those kids and taught those kids it's okay to lie, it's okay to cheat, it's okay to break the rules, and it's funny. And he just was screaming at me and told me I couldn't be a volunteer anymore. So I reported him to the head pastor, who was still there at the time. I reported him to the head pastor, and I said, this is unacceptable. He cannot be doing this kind of thing and calling himself an example to the kids. He's setting a very bad example. And the head pastor, turns out, was a feckless, useless idiot who did absolutely nothing. Which leads me to the reason I'm making this video. Years later, we stopped going. At that point, my husband and I stopped going because the whole church were coming against us because we were insisting on those two getting away from each other, cooling their jets so they would stop having sex, him finish high school and then go on to do college, her finish high school and do things the right way, then get married when they're both 18, she's 18 and he's 2 years older. But how dare we? How dare we? We were only his parents. Now, mind you, his mother was never in the picture. His mother left when he was like 4 years old, wanted nothing to do with them. She would pop in and out every now and then, never paid a penny of child support. My husband wanted custody, and he got it because she didn't even show up to the divorce hearing till it was too late. She was coming in as it was over, and she was walking towards, up the hallway, and my husband said, it's over. She goes, okay, and turned around and left. She didn't want anything to do with those kids. I did. I loved those kids. They were 12 and 14 when my husband and I met, and they were 15 and 17 when we got married. And I loved those kids. Those were my kids as far as I was concerned, just like my son was. I didn't think of them any differently than I thought of my own son. I loved them. But when this happened with Junior, he he had everybody telling him not to listen to us, and he had everybody telling him that we were the enemy, that we were wrong. So he turned on us, and it got so bad that we kicked him out. And he went to go live with a friend briefly, and then went to go live with his girlfriend at her parents' house. And we didn't talk to him for a couple of years. My husband's choice. My husband didn't want to talk to him. I kept trying to get him, my husband, it's like, look, he's your son. Confront him, do something, but don't just not talk. But my husband didn't want anything to do with him. He was disgusted by him. His behavior was disgusting. He had very viciously and nastily turned on my husband and on me, especially on me, because I'm the wicked stepmother. I was actually imposing rules. God forbid. Because I was imposing rules. My husband didn't like confrontation. And in that sense, he did fail his sons, but not totally. I mean, he didn't fail his sons. He was a great father, but he didn't always punish them. I did. Heaven forbid. I believe in discipline, and I believe in strict discipline if the behavior is really bad. And it was. And, I was the wicked stepmother, and that idea was being reinforced by her parents, for sure, and then through her parents, everybody else in the church. So he really hurt my husband really badly. So my husband didn't want to talk to him. And a couple of years later, my ex-husband, my son's father, biological father, passed away unexpectedly. And it really threw my son for a loop. He had been, his biological father played serious mind games on him, and it really messed him up when his dad died and his father died. Roy, my husband, was his dad, but his biological father, he was 18 when his biological father died, and he hadn't spoken to my son in God knows how long. He didn't care. But it really threw him for a loop, and I took my son to the hospital to see his father on his deathbed, and it really got me thinking. It's like, life is so unpredictable, and we can't, I saw how this was affecting my son, so I was saying, we can't just let life go. So I said, we've got to make amends with people. We've got to build a bridge. So we drove to Junior's apartment and woke him up. And we went in and we sat in and we said, look, we can't let this fester. We're family. We can't let this fester. He had already enlisted in the Army, and they just had their second baby. We hadn't talked for a couple of years, and she was finally 18 at this point. They got married when she was 16, and the baby had already been born. He was about a month old when they got married, month and a half, and it was just, we were just absolutely appalled. Her parents were thrilled to death. They wanted her off their hands. They even said so. Her stepfather said so to my husband and I, that they want her off their hands. Anyway, so we tried to make amends. And we tried and tried over, it's been 27 years. And, 24 years since he knocked his whore, now wife, up. They're still married. They're hideous people, but they're still married. And I specifically, have not only reached out with the olive branch, I've reached out with a whole olive tree and it meant nothing. She would slap it back into our face as much as she could, and we would invite them to lunch, and she would only have lunch with us if we were at like a restaurant. She would not allow us in her house, and she wouldn't come to ours. But her, Junior would come with the kids every now and then to our house. And every time we would invite them somewhere, Junior would show up with the kids, and we go, "Oh, well, where's Crystal?" And it's like, "Oh, well, she had to do so." He was lying in front of his kids. It was so clearly a lie, and he would do it right in front of his kids. But that's supposed to be okay. Now, mind you, these two idiots have been going to this church all this time. They're supposed to be pillars of the community, pillars of the church, blah, 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 blah. And they're just awful people. In the meantime, his younger brother, who is 2 months older than my son, we raised him. He lived with us the whole time. He, in the way we saw him, he was a great kid. He was a great kid. Never got in trouble. Was always, respectful, and he was a good kid, and never caused trouble. And he was like a confidant to me. I mean, I told him everything. I shared everything with him. If I had something exciting, I was like, "Hey, Chris," And we loved Chris. We raised Chris. And when Chris got married, he had me as the mother of the groom. He invited his biological mother, but he told her she had to sit in the audience. But he had me as mother of the groom. I was honored. I was absolutely honored, because I had basically raised him since he was 12 and loved him as my own son. And once he got married, even before he got married, and looking back, we were able to see the red flags. During the rehearsal dinner, we met her parents for the first time. And they didn't even say hello. I mean, we went over to them to say hi, and they just went hi and walked away. Our son was marrying their daughter. And then at the rehearsal dinner, they didn't even speak to us, but neither did Chris or Jessica. And it was weird. It was just very weird. And then at the wedding, they seated us at the table where all the rejects sit. They seated us there. Meanwhile, they had a whole table over in the center, a whole series of tables in the center of the reception hall, where everybody in the wedding and her family sat. But we, the parents of the groom, we sat at the reject table all the way off in the corner. And we didn't understand it. We didn't question it at the time. He gave us some bullshit excuse. I don't know what it was. But and then after that, he just changed. He was evil to us. I mean, evil. And we didn't know why. We didn't know what happened. We just had no idea. Now, prior to him meeting his wife, a few years prior to that, he, at the age of 23, 24, started, they termed it as courting the choir director's daughter, who was 17. I and his father, my husband and I, were absolutely disgusted by that. We're like, no. But he was living on his own. There was nothing we could do about it. But we were disgusted. And we said, she's a kid. She's underage. You shouldn't be doing this. Her parents didn't seem to have a problem with it. And although they said they did. They said it could only be courting, it couldn't be dating, and they could never be alone together, and blah blah blah. Well, it was just a weird situation. He even went to China with them. They went to China for 3 weeks to adopt a kid from one of those orphanages, and Chris went with them. He was always with them. He was always with the daughter. I'm not going to say her name because you'll find out in a minute. But at some point, Chris, my husband, we weren't going to that church, but every now and then my husband would go there just to sit in the back room because Chris actually worked at the church. And he was the sound and video editor, and he actually worked at the church doing stuff like that. But he was all over the place in the church, and then so my husband would sit in the sound room in the back, and then Chris would come in and out and blah blah blah. But suddenly he was always in that room, and Roy was a little confused by that. He said, how come you're back in here all the time now? What's going on? And he was very evasive and very weird. And he's like, oh, well, and my husband got a real bad vibe. And he goes, what's going on, Chris? And he got no answer. And my husband kept pushing. And finally he said, well, this girl, I'll say Jane Doe. Jane Doe, she accused me of trying to rape her, and I didn't, but, they're, for proprieties reasons, they're making me stay back here. And my husband was alarmed. He goes, well, did you? And he's like, well, no, of course not. Now, see, we thought we knew Chris. We never believed that in a million years he would have done something like that. However, before we got married, there's all these red flags. There were all these red flags that we just explained away. Before we got married, there was a time that the 5 of us were in the living room at my husband's house where he was living. We were just hanging out and having fun, and Chris was wearing boxers, the kind with the little slit in front, and just kind of hanging out in the living room. And he was kind of he was sitting there, and his boxers were just a little bit starting to open up. And I said, Chris, your boxers are a little. And he got up, went around the back of the chair, and right there was a little wall. Here's the living room, and on this side of the here's the front of the house, and there's a wall that separated the living room from the kitchen. And the wall, there's an opening, and the opening goes either into the hallway or you can turn into the kitchen. So he ducked around the back of the chair into the hallway. It was a very small room, into the hallway behind the wall, was gone for a minute, came back standing sideways so I could see his profile. And he goes, there, is that better? And he had a full-on erection, and his dick was out of his pants. And I went, oh, Chris, and I grabbed a pillow and put it over my face. And my husband's like, what the, and he, Chris, and he ducked back around the thing and put his dick back in. Well, now, it always bothered me then that he did that. And I always thought that he did it on purpose, just to be a jerk, basically. Because at the time, I think he was like 14. And I was just shocked. But I loved his dad so much that I just ignored it and explained it away. But it always bothered me. It wasn't until years later that I looked back and I was like, wait, he had a full-on erection. He had just been sitting in a chair doing nothing. He had a full-on erection. So when he snuck around behind that wall, the reason he was gone so long is because he was getting his dick hard so that he could flash me. That's disgusting. But I didn't, again, lots of red flags that I pushed away, and his dad pushed away. Well, anyway, so we believed him when he said that he hadn't done anything and he was trashing this poor girl's reputation. You know, she's weird and she's accused other guys of this and blah, 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 blah. She was only 17. Well, since we weren't going to the church anymore, we didn't have contact with her parents, and we didn't, you know, we weren't talking to anybody, so we just took his word for it. Well, a year ago, January of 2021, because of Chris's behavior, subsequent behavior after he got married, and the things he said and did were just, they were bizarre and they were cruel. And then he just stopped talking to us. I mean, just within a year after they got married, just nothing, just wanted nothing to do with us, wouldn't talk to us, had, you know, and we're like, what did we do? And he wouldn't tell us. He just wouldn't talk to us. And we're like, what the fuck? You know, what the? So it always bothered us. We never understood what happened. My husband got very sick in 2016. And I called his brother and I told him, listen, your dad got some extremely serious, devastating news, because he was already in the hospital for having had a gallbladder operation. And then he had to go back into the hospital the day after he came out, because apparently he'd had a heart attack while he was in there. Now, he had already had a quadruple bypass a year before we got married, 20 years earlier. And so it was actually exactly 19 years earlier. He went into the hospital on our 19th wedding anniversary. And so he'd had a quadruple bypass 20 years earlier, and those things usually only have a 15-year shelf life, and then they start going bad. Well, we found out his heart had depleted to 24% functionality, and we thought it was a death sentence because he couldn't have another bypass, and they didn't offer another solution at that point when they first told us, so we thought he was going to die. And they came back later and said he could get a pacemaker, but it's like, why didn't you tell us that before? So I called Junior, because I didn't have contact with Chris. I called Junior and I said, listen, your dad just got some extremely devastating news. Now, Junior had come to visit him in the hospital a few days before when he'd first had his gallbladder operation. So he knew his dad was sick. So I said, look, he really needs for you and Chris to please reach out to him. You guys make an effort. He needs that right now because he's always been the one to make the effort, and he needs you guys to reach out to him. Before I could even finish that, and I told him, the first thing I said was he'd gotten some devastating news. Before I even finished the rest of that, he started pitching a fit, a little baby temper tantrum on the phone. Like, oh, you're always accusing us of this and that. And I said, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm saying your dad needs you guys to make an extra effort to reach out to him. He needs it right now. Emotionally, he needs it. And he's just yelling at me, having a fit. Yeah, you do this, you do that, blah, 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 blah. It's like, and he never asked what the devastating news was. He ended the conversation with his temper tantrum and after his temper tantrum and never did ask, what's the devastating news? What happened? Nothing. And his brother, I guess he told his brother, and his brother texted, hey, is it okay if I call you later? Or no, it wasn't even that nice. It was, I can call you later if you want, or something like that. And so my husband was just like, I'm not even going to answer that. Because it was a very, I don't give a shit kind of text message, just kind of, well, okay, I'll talk to you kind of thing. And so my husband was like, I don't want to hear from him. Junior never asked. He never asked. Now, this was October 4th, 2019. So it was October 5th that we found it. No, wait. No, it was a week after that, because he had his gallbladder operation on October 5th. So it was a week after that, in 2016. This is April 2nd, 2022, and Junior still hasn't asked what the devastating news was. None of them have. My husband passed away 6 months ago. Junior didn't ask what he passed away of. He never asked. He never asked, was he sick? He never asked what happened. He never wanted to know. He didn't care. He never cared. None of them did. And so anyway, so all of these, we just got on with our lives. We just got on with our lives. We had my son, who we had a rocky relationship with him for quite a while, because his biological father really messed with him, but he grew out of it finally. And when my husband got sick in 2016, my son moved in with us because I needed help, because I had to be at the hospital, and we had dogs. That one we had just adopted and had just had surgery, and I needed my son here. So he moved in with us to take care of the dogs and to help around the house, to help with the things that his dad couldn't do. And the three of us developed a beautiful, wonderful little family relationship, to the point my husband actually adopted him. Always wanted to, but my son fought it because he had a misplaced loyalty to his father, but he got over that. But anyway, he got over that years ago. So we started in January of 2021, last year. My husband and I had been going over all the red flags that we both had noticed. Now, he said Chris, he had mentioned a lot of red flags that had popped up with both Chris and Roy years before he met me. While they were still kids, there were a lot of red flags. And again, he explained them away to himself, just like I explained them away. Well, we were going over it because things were bothering us, and so we were looking at all of these things. And then it occurred to us. He said, wait a minute. What really happened with Jane Doe? He said she had accused him, but nobody ever told us. We never got to talk to anybody about that. What really happened? Did he really rape her? Did that really happen? And so we contacted her father, who was the choir director at the church at that time when all this happened. We contacted him. And we asked him to tell us what really happened, because we don't know. It had been 16 years since all of that had happened, and nobody had ever talked to us. We weren't going to that church. Chris was 24, I think, when all this happened. We didn't know. So we asked him, could you please tell us? And he didn't want to talk about it. And he's like, it's been so many years. I said, yes, but nobody told us. It's been years for you, but we don't know. So could you please tell us? So he called us, and I had him on speakerphone so that Roy and I could both participate in the conversation. And now, see, I record my call, so I have the entire call on a recording. So I have him saying the brutal details of what he had done, Chris had done to his daughter. He not only had raped her, he had raped her multiple times, beat her black and blue, broke a couple of ribs, over a period of time. This had been happening for a period of time. And she had all these bruises, and her parents were saying, where are these coming from? And she would lie about where they were coming from. And finally, she couldn't take it anymore. And she finally told her mom what had been happening. Okay, so here's the thing. This is now going back to megachurches or church in general. Chris worked for the church. Her father worked for the church. Chris's brother was married to the youth pastor's uncle, step-uncle, and one of the elders' daughters, stepdaughter. And so there was a major connection in the church. So the choir director and his wife, who has since passed away from cancer, they had a meeting with the head pastor and the youth pastor, who is now the head pastor, Glenn. They were all in the room in the office, and Chris admitted everything. Now, this is what her dad said to us. He admitted everything. He even admitted things that they didn't know about. He admitted everything. So here's how they handled it. Instead of calling the police, which if we had known at the time, we would have called the police. We would have called the police. Maybe that's why they didn't tell us. But what they chose to do, they chose not to call the police. They told Chris that he couldn't have any contact with any of the kids in church. He was relegated to the sound room, which is why he was in there, and my husband had asked about it, and he gave him a weird answer, and and he was to get counseling weekly with the head pastor, which he never did. He never did it. And he was never to have any contact with kids. Well, that only lasted a couple of months, and he was back to doing stuff with the kids and everything. And he never, ever once went to any kind of counseling with the pastor. He never fulfilled any of his part of the agreement. I have to say agreement because it doesn't make any sense. He didn't do, there were no consequences. And I asked this guy, the father of Jane Doe, I asked him, I said, why the hell didn't you call the police? We would have if we had known. I said, why didn't you guys even tell us? Why didn't anybody tell us that our son had done this? And he said, well, he was a grown adult. I said, so what? He was still our son. And he's like, well, we didn't want to damage the reputation of the church. This is his daughter he threw under the bus. We didn't want to damage the reputation of the church. He is a child rapist, a brutal child abuser because he broke ribs. He caused bruises all the time. He anally raped her. He vaginally raped her on an ongoing basis. This is his daughter, and he was more concerned with the reputation of the church. Guess where he works now? He works at that church. Yep. He and his wife had moved to South Carolina for a while, and then they moved back, and he still works at that church. Yep. And the head pastor, Glenn, who knew all about this, has no problem with it. My husband called him. My husband called the head pastor. And he said, we were told by Jane Doe's dad that you were there when Chris admitted all of this. You were in the room, in that meeting when Chris admitted all of this. And he goes, well, I wasn't there. And he goes, well, her dad said you were. He goes, well, I'm still good friends with her dad. I'll have to talk to him about that. And, you know, my husband had him on speakerphone so I could hear. And he records his calls too, so we have that. But he just flat out lied. I know he was there because I know him. And I know how he lies. And so I got on the phone and I said, hey, Glenn, do you remember? And I talked about the Acquire the Fire time when he lied to the hotel manager. He goes, yeah, I don't deny that happened. Again, I got it on recording. He goes, I don't deny that happened. And I said, yeah, you've got a history of being a liar. And he said, well, it was nice to talk to you. And before I could even hand the phone back to my husband, he'd hung up. So this is how churches are. Our son, no, not my son. He ain't my son. And he isn't my husband's son either. We wrote him off years ago. But when we heard this, we really wrote him off. Oh my God, he's a freaking psychopath. And then all of the red flags after we heard this, we were like, oh my God. What were we ignoring all of these years? What were we ignoring? All of the red flags we were just like, oh my God. Because it turns out when he had me as mother of the groom for the wedding, he didn't do it because he cared about me. He did it because he wanted one final stab at his real mom. He didn't give a flying fuck about me. He wanted to hurt his mom. That was it. He'd always wanted to get her back for leaving him, and this was the way he did it. It just, but what upsets me more than anything is that they put the reputation of the church over the well-being of all of the children in that church. There's still children in that church, and he still works there. He's almost 40 years old, and he's there around all these children, and nobody cares. They know, well, Glenn knows, but nobody cares. Now see, the worst part about it is the head pastor at that time has passed away. The choir director's wife has passed away. And his daughter, Jane Doe, wants nothing to do with him. Gee, I wonder why. Probably because he threw her under the bus for the reputation of the church. She got severely anorexic to the point that she had to be hospitalized because of all of this. And her parents put the church's well-being before hers. So, and she could see there the whole time, she saw Chris just going about doing what he wanted, no punishment whatsoever. And her parents just letting it happen. My heart breaks for her. My heart absolutely breaks for her. And the choir director told us on the phone that she moved away and wanted nothing to do with him and hasn't spoken to him in years. I don't blame her. So did two of his other kids. His three oldest, I think it is. And she is the oldest. His three oldest moved away and have no contact with him. Duh. You let that happen to your daughter and you put the reputation of the church above it. He doesn't even work for that church anymore. And we asked him, we said, you should do something. There's no statute of limitations on that. And he said, well, no, I don't want to hurt the church. And Roy and I were absolutely disgusted. We tried to call the cops. We tried to press charges or to have them investigate. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it without the victim herself, being the one to press charges. And we didn't even know where she was. We still don't know where she is. And I'm not going to bother her. But It's just, this is where we are. This is where we are. This is where the state of churches are. It's a giant show to get money, to get more people in seats so you can get more money. And it's all about, look at me, the people in praise and worship, which Chris's wife is one of the people in the worship team. It's all about, oh, look at me, look at me. We're such wonderful people. We're such pillars of the community. Love me, love me, love me. And in the meantime, they're doing things like this. And it's vile. So that was a very, very long story to get to my original point. If this little church, and I say relatively little, yeah, it was a big church. It had about 2,000 to 3,000 people. Actually, at the time, they didn't even have 3,000. I think they had closer to 2,000. It was a smaller sanctuary. A relatively big church for Clearwater, but not a giant church. If that kind of church has the attitude of, well, we got to spare the reputation of the church, what about these giant churches that we've heard all of these, scandals and things like that? The state of the church in America, in the world, has gone to hell. God isn't the focus anymore. Jesus isn't the focus anymore. It's a show. It's a pretense. It isn't real. They don't really feel all of this stuff. It's a show. And it's all gone to hell. It's all gone to Satan. Satan is running the show. And God isn't even allowed in the door. And I just wanted to put that out there. Countryside Christian Center, or rather, I'm sorry, Countryside Christian Church in Clearwater. This is what they do.